There's a car stopped at a railroad crossing in my neighborhood. Not because a train is coming, there's no gate, no flashing lights. The car is just sitting there, engine running, driver staring straight ahead. I watched from my porch for maybe 90 seconds before they finally moved. And I thought about how often we stop like that, not because something is blocking us, but because we've forgotten we can move. Welcome to Living on a Prayer. I'm glad you're here. Today we're sitting with Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. And this message about discovering God through sacred stillness. But I want to be honest with you right from the start. I don't think this verse means what we usually think it means. And that difference, it changes everything. Let's sit with the actual text for a moment. Be still. In Hebrew, it's rapha. And rapha doesn't mean sit quietly in a meditation posture. It means something closer to let go. Release your grip. Stop striving. The context matters here. Psalm 46 is a war psalm. Nations are raging, kingdoms are falling, the earth is giving way. And into that chaos, God says, Rapha, let it go. Stop trying to control this. I mention this not to be academic, but because we've turned this verse into something gentle and spa-like, when it's actually a command shouted over battlefield noise. God isn't inviting us to a peaceful moment. God is telling us to drop our weapons. The second part, and know that I am God, uses the Hebrew word yada, to know intimately, experientially, not information about God, but recognition of God. The kind of knowing that comes from encounter, not study. So the verse isn't be quiet so you can think about God. It's release your grip so you can recognize who's actually holding everything together. There's a difference. One is technique. The other is surrender. One happens in our heads. The other happens in our bodies, our schedules, our tightly clenched fists that are exhausted from holding on. I have a friend, a surgeon, who described her operating room to me once. She said the most dangerous moment isn't during the procedure. It's when a less experienced surgeon won't stop, won't step back, won't let the tissue rest. They keep cutting, adjusting, fixing, because stopping feels like giving up. But experienced surgeons know sometimes the most skilled thing you can do is pause. Let the body reveal what's actually happening. Trust that you don't have to control every second. The stillness isn't empty, it's diagnostic. That image has stayed with me, because I think most of us are inexperienced surgeons in our own lives. We're cutting and adjusting and fixing, and we've convinced ourselves that stopping would be irresponsible, lazy, a luxury we can't afford. But what if stillness isn't a luxury? What if it's the only way to see clearly? There's a practice in Quaker tradition called holding someone in the light. When someone is struggling or facing a decision, the community doesn't give advice. They sit in silence together. They create space. They trust that God is already present in that person's life, and their job isn't to fix or direct, but to be still enough that the person can hear what's already being spoken to them. I love this because it flips our usual understanding. We think stillness is passive. But what if stillness is the most active form of attention we can offer? To God, to others, to ourselves. Let me tell you what happened last Tuesday. I had back-to-back meetings, and between the second and third one, I had exactly 7 minutes. My instinct was to check email. Instead, and I don't know why, I walked outside. No phone. I stood under a tree in the parking lot. And for maybe 90 seconds, I didn't pray. Didn't try to have a spiritual experience. I just stood there, breathed, watched a bird, and then something shifted. Not a voice or a vision, just this quiet recognition. I'm not alone. I'm held. This moment is enough. It wasn't profound. It was ordinary, but it was real. And I realized I'd been moving so fast that I'd forgotten that God is present in ordinary moments. I'd been so busy doing things for God that I'd forgotten to just be with God. Sacred stillness isn't about achieving some mystical state. It's about creating space where recognition becomes possible. Think about how you recognize a friend's voice on the phone. You don't have to work at it. You just know. But that knowing comes from accumulated time together, from attention, from presence. We recognize God the same way, not through effort, but through familiarity, through showing up, through being still enough, often enough, that we start to recognize the presence that's been there all along. This is why the Contemplatives talk about practice. Not because God is absent until we perform the right ritual, but because we're distracted, covered in noise, moving too fast to recognize what's right in front of us. So what does this actually look like? Here's what I'm not suggesting. That you need to become a monk or wake up at 4 a.m. or add one more thing to your impossibly full schedule. What I am suggesting is this. Find 60 seconds tomorrow where you stop, completely. Don't fill it with prayer requests or spiritual thoughts. Just be still. Stand at your kitchen window. Sit in your car before you go into work. Close your office door and pay attention to your breathing, to the temperature of the air, to the fact that you're alive right now, in this moment, held by God whether you feel it or not. That's it. 60 seconds of Rafa, of letting go, of not controlling or producing or performing, just being. Here's what I think happens when we practice this, not once, but regularly. We start to notice we're more than our productivity, more than our anxiety, more than our endless task lists. We remember we're beloved before we're useful. We recognize that God's presence doesn't depend on our spiritual performance. And slowly, so slowly, we start to live from a different center, not from fear or obligation or the need to prove ourselves, but from being known, from being held, from that quiet recognition that whispers under everything else, I am God. You are mine. This is enough. That's not passivity. That's transformation. Because people who know they're held don't have to grip so tightly. And people who recognize God's presence don't have to manufacture it through frantic religious activity. So here's the invitation today. Be still. Not as a technique, but as an act of trust. Release your grip on the one thing you're trying hardest to control right now. And in that letting go, see if you can recognize what's been true all along. That you're held. That God is God. That this moment, exactly as it is where the divine is meeting you. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're finding these daily conversations helpful, consider subscribing so we can keep walking this path together. Let's close with this. God of stillness and presence, teach us to let go. Not because we're giving up, but because we're learning to trust. Help us recognize your presence in the ordinary moments we usually rush past. Slow us down enough to know, really know, that you are God and we are held. Amen. Until next time, friends, may God's grace and peace be with you.